Are we ready? Wait, are you 100% there? Oh, you're 100% there.
It's now 6:05.
Okay.
I'd like to call to order the January 15th meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Monica. Planning Commission of the City of Santa Monica. Let's have a pledge of allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's have a roll call.
Give her a moment. Commissioner Chaco,
Here.
Commissioner Fresco,
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Here.
Commissioner Landris,
Here.
Commissioner Reese,
Here.
and Chair Tolkien.
Here. Planning Director's report.
Just waiting for the slide.
Welcome, by the way,
Yes.
into your new role,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
planning director.
Thank you. Brief acting planning director.
You have to get used to answering that.
First and foremost, I hope everybody is safe and your family and friends are safe. In this past week, it's been very trying for everybody, so really glad to see all of you here. Just regarding upcoming Planning Commission, so we actually, I think after looking at it, we're probably going to be moving those items from the February 5th meeting to the 19th. So February 5th will be a canceled meeting. It's a bit of a light agenda, and we're trying to avoid
Thanks.
having you come here for 6 minutes. So those items you see will move to the February 19th meeting. They will not be a February 5th meeting. At the ARB, the last meeting on January the 6th, they reviewed a housing project at 601 Colorado Boulevard that was continued with comments. The Landmarks Commission meeting this past Monday was canceled, and the next meeting will be February 10th, where the commission will be reviewing two nominations for designation. One is at 26 Arcadia Terrace and the other one at 1958 20th Street. Recent council actions, there was a special meeting of the City Council last Friday, January the 10th, where they ratified the proclamation of an emergency and an emergency order. And just to give you, there's several provisions to it, but highlights that might be of interest to the commission. Enforcement of short-term rentals and residential leasing regulations have been temporarily suspended. There was actually a revised order that was just issued yesterday, and that adds back in that the rentals must be to natural persons that are displaced because of the fire, and you cannot rent more than one unit in Santa Monica. But given the emergency and the need, there is a temporary suspension of those provisions of the municipal code. We are temporarily allowing hotel stays for more than 30 days, and there's also a temporary suspension of building permits within evacuation warning and order areas, which really is just north of San Vicente at this point in terms of warning areas. The January 28th is the upcoming City Council meeting. There'll be a study session on the, I'm sorry, it's not on the equity plan. That's a mistake. There is the airport conversion project draft guiding principles, the safety element update, so the adoption of that document, and then extending the IZO. This is allowing city authorized uses pursuant to a declared emergency without a temporary use permit. That's the report. Happy to take your questions.
I have just a quick question if possible. When you say building permits were temporarily suspended, that's the processing of building permits?
No, it's actually permits that have been issued, so it's actually, not explaining that well, it's construction activity. So the permits have been issued and construction activity is prohibited in those areas.
Okay, thank you.
How long does that last for?
It's until so it lasts for as long as the proclamation, the declaration of the emergency, but obviously if the evacuation warning areas are fully lifted, then those prohibitions on construction activity would also lift.
While we are temporarily suspending short-term rentals and
the requirements, understandably, as well as the hotel stays. Are we collaborating with the county district attorney to fight price gouging?
Yes, absolutely. It is being monitored and is being actively enforced. And we have messaging out, to community if you want to report price gouging, to report it to our consumer protection unit. So we're aware, where that occurs, it is being addressed.
Okay. And then with respect to, if I'm not mistaken, people who are employees in Santa Monica, this is way outside our lane, but I'm going to ask it anyway. People who are employees in Santa Monica who may have lost their homes qualify for, if they're affordable, if they qualify for below market rate housing, that is one of the things that puts them to the top of the list. Am I right? In the same, just like being Ellis or there's a disaster provision. If you're employed for more than 25 hours a week in Santa Monica?
Yeah, I mean, I am not the expert on the
Okay.
priority, yeah.
Okay.
The
But I-
BMH list, yeah.
Think it's worth noting that that's available to folks. Chair, could we do a little agenda management? Could we move the,
Have questions.
oh, I'm sorry.
still.
I apologize.
You have,
I had a question, which is, we have a prohibition on condo conversions if we go below 5% vacancy rate, which we never do. But it seems like there's so much demand for housing that could happen, and maybe we should do something to protect people in rent control units in that case. If, I just am concerned with so many evacuees looking for places to live in this vicinity.
So, yeah, I mean, the suspension of both the short-term rental and the leasing regulations doesn't mean that, the tenant protections, just cause evictions, like all of those protections are still in place. None of those have been removed, if you will.
So they couldn't, because my understanding, maybe I don't am not remembering it right, I didn't go back and read the code. But my recollection was that the code says that if we go below 5% vacancy, that owners can convert units to
Oh, so, yeah, the
condos.
vacancy is not like just a moment in time.
It has to be for,
remembering, it's like over it's like over a time period.
so we,
So-
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I just got worried, sitting in my dusty home, thinking about all the bad things that could happen. Sorry.
I think we're gonna see a lot of people from Palisades coming to move into those empty units, whatever, it's nothing we can do anything about.
If they're empty.
Well, we want them to move
Want
into
them
the
to move.
empty
We'll want to.
units.
Right.
We just don't want
Want them.
owners to take advantage. What I was concerned was if the vacancy rate goes down, occupied units, people could be moved out for so-called condo conversions, which would make, that's what I was worried about. But they're saying that they don't think that'll happen because of other kinds of protections.
Yeah, I mean, even if just the process of, if it ever got to that point, it is not allowed to just like, evict tenants to convert it and vacate it. So
Right.
just,
I understand that.
Okay,
there's a, yeah.
I just got worried.
I think we've been under 5% for quite some time in terms of apartment occupancy. I mean, usually the reports I see in Santa Monica are, 2 to 3% vacancy rate in apartments, so.
So the vacancy rate actually needs to exceed 5% in order for, there are many conditions in
right,
order to
see.
get a condo conversion, to qualify for a condo conversion. One of them is that the vacancy rate exceeds 5%.
Exceed, duh.
So we're
Thank
actually
you,
going in the
thank
other
you.
direction possibly?
Enough said. Sorry.
Jim,
Smoke
do you
on.
have something else to say?
No, I was going to go for the same thing Sean was.
Sean?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of Pierre, sorry, Nina. I wanted to make a motion that we move the Wilshire DR and STOA up before the study session on the legislation.
Yes.
Consent calendar.
I'm sorry?
Can we just put it to the consent calendar?
That would make even more sense. But I don't know if staff has changes because there are There's at least one
I would
typo.
second that. Can I second that?
You can, but do we?
Yeah, we can move it. I second your motion to move it to consent.
Okay. Can we take a vote? Do we have to take a vote?
Wait,
Well, we have to
Just
get to consent calendar first.
yeah.
You can do that as a voice vote.
All those.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That was all ayes.
I
That was all I
have a feeling that there's nobody out there, so I'm not going to announce all the requirements for
Yeah, so you'll want
chits and,
anything.
so let's go right to,
Planning commissioner
right.
announcements.
Are we going to go right to the,
No, you
Planning
haven't.
Commissioner announcements.
Planning commissioner announcements. Number 5.
yeah, I know. I'm just saying, I don't think there's anybody out in the audience going to speak, or, but,
That's different. We're asking for planning commissioner announcements.
okay. If the planning commissioners have any announcements?
Okay.
Okay,
Now.
sorry.
All right.
Okay, so we don't have any announcements. Let's go to, let's
So let's,
pass through public comment because there's no other public.
But
let's-
somebody could show up. Okay.
I don't have any public input, so. And there's nothing on the consent calendar.
Yeah, there is. We
Let's
just
go-
put it there.
It's something in the consent calendar. So bring up the consent calendar, let's vote on it. We just added the Wilshire project.
Yeah,
So
let's go directly to 1901.
Right.
You got a
To the
presentation from
consent
the.
No. There's no presentation. We just put it on the consent calendar. I
Okay,
believe staff might have a couple of scrivener's errors for us, and we can vote on it.
You'll want to have your ex parte
Oh,
disclosures again.
no,
Okay.
no ex parte?
No.
no. Who is it? Where is it again?
I did go to I did stand on 19th and Wilshire, but that's about as ex parte as I can give you.
I believe this year has already been like 11 months long, so.
Do we have to take 3 votes, or can we vote one?
No, you can vote in one whole motion.
So I moved the consent calendar.
There's a typo in the STOA. Did we fix the STOA? There is a
You
typo
can
in the.
include that in your, whatever motion you make, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move, is it all right, Jim? I'll just say it for the record. The typo is in the waiver on page 5 of the STOA. In waiver finding B, there's a typo that says complies will instead of complies with. So I'm moving the consent calendar with the correction to the STOA.
I'll second that. Nice memory.
Well done.
You know which word it was in the sentence?
Which page number was it?
Page 5 of the STOA.
Yeah, he knew, which, that was impressive. Okay, so we have a first and a second.
Yep. Okay, Commissioner Chaco,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris,
Yes.
Commissioner Reese,
Yes.
and Chair Tolkien.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So we've done that. I guess we get that. Do the commissioners have anything they want to say about the fires? I have something.
No, we have an item.
What do we have?
We have a study session on the legislative updates for 2025. Do we not? Or did those get moved?
No, it's on 8.
Yeah, item 8.
Hold on.
That should have been your planning commission announcement.
What?
You should have had a planning commission announcement if you wanted to talk about the fires. And we can go back to that agenda item if you'd like.
Okay. Say that again, Jim.
So I think if you wanted to speak about the fires, you should have made a comment in planning commissioner announcements, which we passed, but we can go back to it. You can
No,
just-
it's okay. I'll,
Okay.
I mean, maybe it's enough said.
So do you want to call item 8A?
Yeah.
Chair, could we please call item 8A, update and discussion regarding highlights of 2024 state housing legislation?
Where are you?
Item 8A.
Right here. May I show you? Right here.
I think Rachel's ready.
It's all right, sir.
Right there.
For the study session, yes. Let's have the presentation. Staff presentation.
Hello. Hello. Hope all your people are safe.
Yes, doing our best, but yes, thankfully my family and I are safe, and hope that all of your friends and family are safe too as well. As Jane said, it's certainly trying times, and goes to show you, even throughout these difficult times, I'm glad that we're all together here and really showed the best of the community, so. So I'm here tonight to present a legislative update on the 2024 California legislative session. As you all know, there's been a number of bills passed, about 30 bills that just addresses housing and homelessness alone. A lot of them address these topic issues, as I have listed here, which is the RHNA and the housing elements, housing element APRs, the annual progress reports. Also touches on the Housing Accountability Act and enforcement provisions of the Housing Accountability Act, including builder's remedy. There's also some amendments to density bonus and ADU laws, as well as some new legislation that addresses housing entitlement and streamlining these housing projects. There's also a lot of new legislation that addresses fees, particularly for housing projects, as well as HCD enforcement, as well as CEQA. Unless otherwise noted, all of these bills went into effect January 1st, 2025. There's only one bill that goes into effect July, in which I will talk about later. And I just want to note that since there's so many new legislation, city staff is still reviewing these bills, and so we don't have all the answers for you, but we will get back to you, and we are still reviewing some of these state legislation and how they really integrate with our Santa Monica City Code and how it affects our entitlement process. So, and in other cases, we're awaiting on HCD to provide some guidance. So this session tonight provides some summary overview of the key legislation. So the first category of state legislation addresses RHNA and housing elements. AB 3093 modifies housing element law. Highlight of this is that it requires us, the city, to provide in our annual progress reports the progress include in our APRs how we are meeting our RHNA for the 6th cycle and the previous housing element cycles. And starting in the 7th cycle, which is the next cycle, it adds 2 income categories, which is acutely low income and extremely low income in the RHNA. So as you may recall, our old AHPP ordinance included an extremely low income category. We've eliminated that as part of the 6th cycle since the RHNA didn't call for the extremely low income. And so now they're adding it back in. And then this law also requires that any LCP amendments, local coastal plan amendments, be done alongside the rezoning. And we would have no later than 3 years to do this after the adoption of the housing element. This law also requires us to analyze historic preservation practices and how it affects our RHNA, how it affects our ability to meet the RHNA. Also, the law requires that SCAG and other council of governments address homelessness. How this translates into our 7th cycle, we don't know yet. However, it does say that homelessness shall be addressed in the housing element law. Next bill is the SB 7, and this is more of a procedural changes to how the RHNA is done. Basically, it removes the appeal process for cities and counties without a council of governments. This doesn't affect us. And also repeals provisions that the HCD use an alternative process to determine the RHNA. Again, this is just procedural that affects SCAG. It does not affect us. Also, AB 1886 This addresses basically what happened in the last cycle, which is a lot of cities trying to self-certify their EIR. This basically says you cannot self-certify, or not your EIR, your housing element. This basically says that you cannot self-certify that your housing element is not compliant with state housing element law until HCD says so. And so this just makes that clarification. And then AB 2023 extends the housing element rezoning period to either 1 year or 3 years and 90 days if the jurisdiction meets certain criteria. Also, it creates a rebuttable presumption of invalidity in any legal action challenging city's action or failure to act if HCD says that you're not in compliance with housing element law. So this is all legal stuff, but basically the gist of this is to ensure that states or cities and counties are complying with housing element law. AB 2597 reduces the appeal period of the draft RENA to 30 days. Again, procedural. This has to do with SCAG's drafting of the RENA. And it revises the Council of Governments timelines for determining the RENA. And also, this is an important one for us, is it extends the housing element due date for all of Los Angeles County and certain Imperial County jurisdictions by 6 months. So instead of 18 months, we have 24 months from the adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan. And we'll take it. AB 2580 requires local agencies to provide in its annual progress report any information regarding historic designations, and whether or not these historic designations affects the housing development project. Again, our annual progress reports is usually due April 1st, and so this would require us to report on any historic designations. This is to ensure that cities don't use historic designation as a way to block housing, essentially. AB 2667 addresses affirmatively furthering fair housing, and it makes us, again, with the APR, report on our progress in affirmatively furthering fair housing. So we have to include in our APR now the number of units that was approved and disapproved within an opportunity area by the income level. And then HCD is also under this law. HCD has to review adaptive reuse ordinances and notify the city if it is not in compliant on or before January 1st, 2025. And then also this new law requires that starting in the 7th cycle, a city publishes its sites inventory for the housing element online, and then we would have to send a notification to all those requesting a copy of this sites inventory at least 90 days before we adopt the housing element. This is all procedural stuff, affects, in terms of how it affects Santa Monica, it affects the way that we do our annual progress reports at the staff level. And then starting in the 7th cycle, we would have to do a little bit more noticing and publication of the sites inventory, which we already have our sites inventory online, but this would require additional noticing. AB 2904, this affects noticing again. This is a procedural requirement. It requires us to notice at least 20 days if there is a change in the zoning ordinance or an amendment to the zoning ordinance that affects the permitted uses of a property. AB 1893, this is an important one which does affect our municipal or zoning ordinance, and it's because it revises the definition of a housing project in the HAA. As you may recall, in the Housing Accountability Act, if you meet the definition of a housing project, you are protected by the HAA, and the city cannot deny or make infeasible a HAA protected project unless we make certain public health and safety findings. So before, it used to include 2/3 new or converted square footage is residential. However, now they've added the second and the third bullet here, which is at least 50% of the new or converted square footage is residential, and it's at least 500 units, and no portion of that project is designated as hotel, motel, or transient lodging. So this would mean, as an example, if you have a 500-unit project, half of that is office, and the other half is 500 units, that is a protected project under the HAA. So 250,000 square feet of office, 250,000 square feet of residential, and 500 units, that is now an HAA protected project. And so similarly, the 50% applies to if you're doing a conversion, of course. And so similarly, that's the third bullet. And then also they added farm worker housing as a protected housing project. 1893 also modifies builder's remedy provisions. This one means that if you are a builder's remedy project that was submitted before January 1st of this year, you are vested. However, adds some new provisions in the builder's remedy provisions, which establishes density limits, affordability levels, and so forth for what builder's remedy projects are allowed to request. And actually, sorry, I just want to note that because of the new definition of housing project, we would be looking to amend the zoning ordinance and the definition of housing project in section 9.52.
Before you, can you just talk about the bullet that you didn't talk about?
Oh, sorry.
Disapprove or condition, because I think that could apply to us.
Oh, this just means that if we, let me read this again. Oh, that just means that if a project we didn't have a housing element that was in compliance, but they're not proposing a builder's remedy project, we can deny that project. It has to be proposed as a builder's remedy project. We can deny that project if it's not consistent with our objective development standards or general plan and a zoning ordinance. So the only way that we can deny it is if it's not consistent with those, with our general plan and zoning ordinance. Does that make sense?
So if it's a project that doesn't meet the builder's remedy requirements,
Correct.
we can.
And does not comply with our general
Right.
plan. Yeah.
Okay.
SB 393, this is just procedural. It basically, the gist of it is that it placed a burden of proving an economic hardship on the plaintiff that is suing a housing project. Before, it used to be the defendant that had to show a proof of economic burden. Now it's saying if you're suing a housing project, low or moderate income housing project, then the burden is on the person who's suing. And so this makes it harder for people to challenge a low or moderate income housing project. Again, procedural, legal procedures doesn't really affect us. AB 1413 establishes timelines in the HA for local agencies to consider objections and any kind of comments on determining whether or not an HA protected project is exempt for CEQA. What this means is if someone's proposing a HAA protected project and they're saying, hey, I'm exempt from CEQA, and they provide us notice, we have certain timelines, city staff has certain timelines to adhere to, which is we have to post the applicant's written notice within 5 days, then we have to consider it, and then we have to make a determination. The city has to make a determination at least 60 days after that initial notice is given. So it places the burden on city staff to make sure we are responding to an applicant's declaration that they're exempt from CEQA. SB 1037, it basically gives a little more teeth to HCD and proceeding with housing element law or housing law enforcement, and increases the penalties to $10,000 per month, not exceeding $50,000, and increases civil penalties up to $50,000 per month for each violation. General plan updates, moving away from housing, this general plan updates requires an update to the conservation element on or after January 1st to analyze the movement of wildlife and habitat connectivity. You are allowed to incorporate by reference a certified local coastal plan into the conservation element if it meets those requirements. AB 2684 requires an update to the safety element to address extreme heat on or after January 1st, 2028. The city is already, as Jing had mentioned, this city has already prepared a safety element update, which already addresses extreme heat, and that's scheduled for adoption on January 28th. In terms of density bonus law, revisions made include AB 2694, which just expands the definition of what a shared housing unit is. This does require a code amendment We're just going to copy and paste literally from state law what this new definition is. It doesn't really change much. AB 3116 also defines what a state housing development project is, because before it didn't include that, and it amends the density bonus law to provide certain density bonuses based on the percentages of lower income units provided. Again, just a straight copy and paste amendment to our code to reflect state law. ADUs, so this is a very important one. This SB 1211 increases the number of detached accessory dwelling units on a lot with an existing or proposed multifamily dwelling from 2, which is what it used to be before, but now it is 8 detached ADUs on a multifamily lot, so long as that number does not exceed the number of existing units on a lot. So if you have a parcel with 5 multifamily dwelling units, they could build 5. If they have 6, they could build 6. But if they have 8, they could go as high as 8, but no more than 8. And then if you are a proposed multifamily, it's no more than 2. And so a code change would be required to our ADU ordinance, of course, to implement this. AB 2533 is a procedural change to require that that we are not allowed to deny an unpermitted ADU or JADU constructed before 2020 unless we find that there is a violation of a building standard. And if there is a violation of a building standard, we have to provide them a checklist of what it would take to bring it up to standard. And so we would have to include a local program to include published information such as an inspection checklist. SB 1077 requires the Coastal Commission to work with HCD to develop guidance to ensure that LCP amendments are facilitated and simplify the process for ADUs in the coastal zone. As you know, the coastal zone, the California Coastal Commission has its own separate requirements for ADUs. SB 1123. So if you recall from last year, 2023 legislative session, there was a law called SB 684 that says that the city has to ministerially approve subdivisions of 10 units or less. So this SB 1123 modifies that prior law and says that expands eligibilities to parcels zoned to allow multifamily residential uses. Before it said zoned for multifamily. Now it says zoned to allow multifamily, which means commercial zones that allow multifamily would not be covered. This also importantly adds vacant single-family zone parcels of no larger than 1.5 acres to the list of eligible parcels. And you can see here vacant means that it hasn't been occupied by housing within the last five years. It's not rent-controlled housing. It has no affordable housing as well. Also allows lot frontage to the list of standards that this type of project doesn't need to comply with. As I mentioned before, this is the one law that becomes effective July 1st, 2025, and applies to all cities, including charter cities. City staff is still evaluating this one. This one is a little hairy. We've asked HCD guidance about implementation of this law. They've indicated that they are in the midst of producing a guidance on this law and how to implement it. So we are evaluating possible code changes as we speak, pending further guidance from HCD. SB 450 just amends SB 9. SB 9, as you all know, allows duplexes and lot splits in a single-family zoned parcel. So SB 450 is just a cleanup law. It removes the prior demolition threshold of 25%. And then also says that we cannot impose objective standards unless those standards apply uniformly within the zone. And also clarifies that SB 9 applies to all cities, including charter cities. AB 2243, this modified a couple laws, which is basically this should say AB 2011. AB 2011 and SB 6, those two laws, if you can't remember, basically says housing projects are by right uses in commercial zoned corridors. And so, of course, this law hasn't really been utilized in Santa Monica because there's a number of eligibility requirements attached to this law, like they have to pay prevailing wages, they have to participate in the apprenticeship program. However, this AB 2243 modifies those two prior laws and says before the acreage limit was 20 acres, now it's 100 acres, and also removes the prohibition that projects cannot be within 100 feet of a freeway. And again, I don't think this affects Santa Monica because there's a number of criteria attached to this, including, which is the prevailing wages in the apprenticeship program and the labor standards. AB 2729, so this is another important one for projects that have had existing entitlements that were issued before January 1st, 2024, and is set to expire by December 31st, 2025. This would extend those house entitlements by 18 months. AB 3122 makes minor amendments to SB 35. I know this is a lot of numbers, but SB 35, if you can't remember, was the by right projects if your jurisdiction was not meeting your RHNA targets. And it was like, if you didn't meet your lower income, then you were subject to by right, this by right process. And so the AB 3122 modifies certain provisions of SB 35 and allows the project to be modified post-entitlement and retain the processing, but modification means up to 15% increase in construction square footage or the total residential units decreases by 15% or more. And it requires local governments to respond within 30 days when they've provided revisions to address feedback provided by the government. AB 1801 expands by right approval for supportive housing projects to include administrative office space. This is a very minor one to say that if the supportive housing project has some office space in it, it still qualifies as a by right supportive housing project. Just a cleanup item there. The next section has to do with fees, and the overarching theme of all these bills that address fees is they're trying to lower the cost for housing projects, particularly this SB 937 is delaying the collection of fees for housing projects so that the city cannot collect these fees until the date of the final inspection or the date of the certificate of occupancy is issued, whichever occurs first, unless expenditures have been made, like they've already connected to the sewer line and they're receiving, then we can collect those fees. So also payment of fees for designated residential development projects shall not occur until the certificate of occupancy or the first certificate of occupancy is issued unless certain conditions are made. And so all of this is to say that we cannot collect fees, it's delaying the fees until the project has been built or there's been a certificate of occupancy issued. So it basically delays the costs incurred by a housing project. AB 2430 has to do with affordable housing monitoring fees. It prohibits the city from charging a monitoring fee for 100% affordable housing development if it's using state density bonus law and if it's subject to a regulatory monitoring agreement, such as TCAC funds. And so we don't actually, I've checked with our housing division, we don't charge a monitoring fee already on this, so we are in compliance with this law. So I don't think any changes need to be made here. AB 2663 requires that by January 1st, 2026, cities and counties must collect inclusionary housing, the local agencies that collect inclusionary in lieu fees, we have to post that online, show the public how much we've spent and how much they were, say how much we've collected and how much of it was spent and how they were spent. So it's basically disclosure purposes to show what we've done with the inclusionary fees. SB 1210 requires utility agencies on January 1st, 2026 to post online our schedule of fees for service connections for each housing type and the estimated timelines for completing connections. Again, this is to make sure that housing projects had no upfront, what their estimated cost would be in terms of utility connections. And then the next two bills, 1820 and 3012, says that each city must create an online fee estimate tool by July 1st. For us, it would be July 1st, 2032, since we are less than 500,000 people. And that we would have to give them a preliminary fee estimate within 30 days if they're SB 330 application. So this doesn't come into effect, as I said, we wouldn't have to do this until July 1st, 2032. So we have some time to get this online fee calculator up. The next batch of bills addresses renter protections. So this one says if you're a landlord, you cannot deduct the cost of carpet cleaning, for example, from your deposit if it's related to wear and tear. And so this is to ensure that like renters are not being absurdly charged for, normal wear and tear that the landlord would have had to replace anyways for for example, like for the carpet. AB 2747 says that on or after 2025, a landlord of a residential property with more than 15 units must give tenants the option of having their full on-time rent payments reported to at least one consumer reporting agency. So just to show credit, that they could have credit. And then SB 611 prohibits certain fees from being charged by landlords and also provides some additional protections to military service members in connection with security charges. The next one, this is another important one, 2553. So if you recall, the definition of a major transit stop has great relevance in terms of parking and CEQA. For example, under the current law, if you're within a half mile of a major transit stop, you don't have to provide parking. Now, AB 2553 revises the definition of a major transit stop to say that if you're at an intersection of two or more bus lines with 20 minutes intervals or less, then you're considered a major transit stop. Before, it used to say 15 minutes. So now it's 20 minutes. And so you'll see on this slide here, the old map is on the left, which is that big blue area. That's the major transit stop area, which is the transit priority area. These are all, the blue areas are areas that don't require parking, for example. It extended all the way to Wilshire. Now with the new definition of a major transit stop, that blue blob has gotten bigger. It's expanded over to Montana and also now covers most of the the southeast portion of the city near the airport. So you'll see that change there. However, I always want to know, it does exclude the part of Lincoln Boulevard that is to the south, just so you see there. So for example, like the Lincoln and Ocean Park project, the housing project, that's now outside of that. Due to the changes in transit service. The next few batches relate to CEQA exemptions. AB 2085 creates a ministerial approval process for community clinics. This is community clinics that address things like women's health. And so think of women's health, reproduction health clinics are now by right. So we would have to amend our ordinance for that. SB 1395 extends and expands on CEQA exemptions for homeless shelters. That's already in place, but it just extends it. AB 2057 expands an existing CEQA exemption for adoption of an ADU ordinance or a JADU ordinance. And then I won't go through too much in detail on all the CEQA exemptions, but you can read it here: routine stormwater facilities, maintenance, mobile home projects, public university housing projects, habitat restoration projects, certain residential housing projects on infill sites in unincorporated areas, as well as changes of use for like public access for for a park area, those are all now have CEQA exemptions. And so I know that's a lot, 30 bills. We tried to cram it all together. A lot of it is procedural, but however, we'll do our best to answer the questions. As I said before, we are still trying to digest all of this, and so we're here to answer any questions you have.
Commissioners have any questions of staff?
Yep. I saw a couple of bills on the LCP, which we're still working on. That prompts a question about the extent to which any of these packages substantially disrupt your work plans. In the sense that, like, is something getting slowed down, or is something getting made easier, or do you now have to drop what you were doing in a planful way because now the state's making you focus somewhere else?
Yeah, so this specifically to the LCP.
No, in general, but
Okay,
LCP
I
made me
can-
think of it.
Yeah, I'll address the LCP. I think the biggest change that'll, kind of change the process of the LCP will be with regards to the next housing element cycle, the 7th cycle, and we'd have to then update the LUP again to reflect any of those upzoning changes. But it currently doesn't have any impact on the ongoing process.
But we don't have our own.
No, we
LCP
don't
yet.
have the certified LCP yet.
Right.
So we're currently working on the LUP draft adoption, which council had adopted. It didn't go to Coastal Commission for certification. So we're bringing that back since that's been so much time since that was
Right.
reviewed. So we're in the process of updating that. Following that would be then the implementation plan. So both of those together would be the full LCP package.
Right, okay. But it's not like you have to drop what you're doing and scramble.
No, not for the current process.
That's, at least there's that.
I mean, I think to address the general issue, like every year, right, as the legislature comes up with new laws, I mean, it does impact our work because we have to take time to absorb what it is that they did and then to understand if it is affecting what we're doing, especially if we're in the middle of policy making or what have you, and it's a lot to digest, and especially, laws change every year, and like we haven't even quite figured out what they did last year, before it
Right.
changes again, or
Exactly.
like or no one even knows the effect of it, and I will say we are not the only city that is expressing that level of frustration, because I think a lot of jurisdictions are catching up to things that were done even 3 years ago. It's just, it's a lot to take in, as you see. And I think, I just want to highlight that the summary, this is a summary, it, does not include HCD guidance yet. It's just our sort of like preliminary look at it. So I do want to emphasize that, the information you have here, could certainly change. Interpretations of it might change over time.
But like for something like the change on, I mean, that seems to me the biggest thing is the parking relaxation with the definition of a major transit stop. And Rachel, your point about Lincoln suddenly falling out where it was in before, I mean, it's the kind of thing where I think we've said we don't think there ought to be a lot of parking requirements in Santa Monica generally. We've said that as a commission. Council has said versions of that as well. It strikes me, it's like, why are we going to go to the trouble of rewriting for that tiny little stretch of Lincoln to add back the parking requirements when the minute the housing that is planned there gets built and is fully occupied, Big Blue Bus might just turn around and say, you know what, we're going to be back to 20-minute service.
Yeah.
So are there ways that you can, like triage the work so that we're not bouncing constantly? Like that one, right? Because we're free to waive parking in that part of town, right?
Right, I mean, I
That's
think,
my example.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think, like in the policy discussions, like just around parking, and I think the commission and, like you can always, sometimes it's not great to rely on state law because it can change all the time, and
That's what I'm
there's,
getting at.
there's good reason, at the local level. It's like if this is something you want to pursue, the city always has the authority, for example, to just
and we,
eliminate
yeah.
that, right?
And we
Yeah.
did.
And we did.
We did, frankly, because
Yeah.
for all housing projects
Yeah.
now, we don't require parking. So even if you're a housing project, even on Lincoln, you don't.
Doesn't matter,
Yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't matter because you're a housing project. We did that. Yeah. It affects commercial projects really, and so, yeah.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Yeah, I just had a point of clarification, and I agree that the state needs to get away from dabbling in minutia. A lot of this seems like just so small, kind of picayune kind of detail that it's hard to keep track of. But I had a question just about on AB 3093 in the new upcoming 7th cycle of the RENA housing element. They have a new designation for acutely low income. I haven't come across that before. And do you know what the corresponding area median income percentage is for acutely low? That can't be, is it 15? Because I know 30 is extremely low.
I believe it's up to 0 to 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
How, okay.
That would be like, that's a new, if I may, that's related to PSH, right? Because technically, a long-term PSH individual might have zero income ever.
Right.
Yeah,
But
it,
Tiny
usually they
little, or a
have-
tiny little stream.
it aligns with, I think, the overall pretty, a new requirement in the 7th cycle is to account for the housing needs of the unhoused. So if you recognize, the RENA and previously, right, or currently, it only addresses, we talk about it in the housing element, but you were not assigned a number, specifically associated.
Yeah, that's almost like transitional care for an individual who hasn't yet been able to access government benefits. Because usually you're at 30% if at that.
That's effectively what we're understanding, that the state is wanting cities to include next, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
I have a question. Do we have any indication of what the governor is talking about? He's relaxing certain standards so that the rebuilding goes faster.
Are you talking in relationship to the fires?
Yes.
Yeah, so the governor has waived CEQA and,
Coastal Act.
yeah, what is it?
Coastal Act,
Yeah, Coastal Act, and in making sure that when people are rebuilding, they won't be subject to those.
yeah, but to be clear, it only applies to, right now, it has to be in the same location, and then there's some percentage limits or something. I think it's 10% more, something like
Does it
that.
affect us because we haven't had to burn it?
No, that's not how we read it. It doesn't say relocated, it says rebuild, and it says substantially the same location. So it would be in, obviously areas that experienced loss of, yeah.
And it's still.
There's no public input. so-
No, I was going to say, and it's still in process, right? So there's, he suspended I'm just looking up what I was reading about it, but, there's still a lot that's vague.
Yeah.
The LCP, Malibu has an LCP, so the Coastal Act is gone, but they're bound by their LCP, so, that creates legal uncertainty.
Commissioner Reese? No.
I don't really have any questions. I will say a comment to Commissioner Hamilton, the state has to stop meddling in these minutia. I mean, the problem is they create these laws and then we start working with them and we find these little problems, and then that's why all these cleanup items are coming back for us. There's good intentions. What is the saying? Something about the path of good intentions that leads the wrong place. Anyways, good luck with digesting all of these things and trying to keep us out of trouble before they change
Enjoy
again.
the fray.
It's a full-time, I realize it's a full-time job.
Right, and you guys as planning commissioners have to, also make sure that, we're doing our jobs too, so
Right.
all of us are in this together.
I can only imagine the bills that are coming down the pike in the next 6 months.
We'll see. I mean, if I may, I think the reason that I asked about the non-builder's remedy exclusion is that we have had conversations, right, in this community about, there has been controversy around the builder's remedy projects, and there has been controversy around the projects that have come in that have been compliant or have been, they've been compliant or they weren't quite there and then they resubmitted. I think one of the things that creates a lot of confusion in the community is around the rights of applicants to resubmit their projects and what they can do when they resubmit, what's vested, what's not vested. So that particular element of that bill, I think, is really important to reassure our community, for example, that when, that our rules and regulations still count for something in that particular moment, right? If somebody comes along, just because we were out of compliance with the housing element for a minute, right? Didn't open the door, and clearly now it doesn't open the door for anybody to do anything, anywhere, at any time, right? The builder's remedy projects had to have certain characteristics related to affordability and other considerations. And I do think it's important to stress that sort of piece, because it's not just that we're swimming in minutia, it's that people who live, like people who live here, people who live in California, like even people who really want more housing, they also, I think, want certainty, and they want to understand that there's fair play in how we get from, how we get to the housing that we get, and that people are going to be treated right, and that our community is not going to, that our community standards actually mean something.
Yeah, I didn't really stress or elaborate on the builder's remedy provisions, but there are now arms around the builder's remedy provisions now. So there's a limit to how much you can propose. There's a limit, there's a certain affordability level that you have to propose to be a builder's remedy project now. So, yeah, so it's not a free-for-all anymore, which it was. But projects that were submitted prior are still vested. They're still allowed to change up to 20% and so forth. But yeah, now moving forward, you can't just build to the limit and not abide by anything anymore. There are some arms around it now.
There's no public input, so we've had our open. Any more discussion?
Yeah, just another quick question on this slide, just to make sure I understand it. So the 2/3 new or converted square foot residential now only applies to projects with less than 500 units, is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's what currently is in place, or not currently, but that was what it was in place before January 1st of this year. And now we have this 500 unit threshold that says, like, basically to allow bigger projects. Yeah.
So, I guess, let me ask this question then. We have created a program which council seems to be backing because of the way that they played with some of the rules in December, of encouraging the developments in Bergamot. So it strikes me that the only real place right now where this could apply in Santa Monica is Bergamot at the moment, realistically.
Office campus?
And the office campus, right. But we don't have a program over there, and I live too close to there to talk about it unless we rule out some, the Ocean Park, on Ocean Park.
Okay.
Unless we rule out a couple of parcels. But in Bergamot, this is not gonna impact our incentive program, is it?
Yes, it is.
It is,
So,
that,
Yeah.
council direction in December was to remove the 1 acre threshold
but outside Bergamot.
outside Bergamot, right? Between AA and DR, so that 1 acre threshold, their direction was to remove that. The second part of their direction was to basically, we have this definition of a streamlined housing project in our zoning code, and it's the 75% residential, essentially, and the commercial can only be on the first 2 floors, right? That is the minimum qualification to get into the AA route. So council gave direction to basically eliminate that and replace it with this.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like an alignment. We will not have this special local definition of a streamlined housing project. It will simply be a housing project as defined by the HAA. Now, council hasn't acted on this. I'm just explaining this is their direction. And we will bring that back to them in April
Which,
when we bring these.
if I remember correctly, we asked them to do when we brought them the house, from the very first draft of the housing element we brought them, we said, drop this local artisanal definition. I believe we voted that way.
That was part of,
Yeah.
the motions, yeah.
But so
Obviously, this
yay,
is a-
right? So like,
This is a very different definition.
but this is a very different definition, but it's not going to, I guess what I'm asking is, it's not going to somehow disincentivize the open space provisions, the unit mix provisions, those things that we so
No, yeah,
carefully
the-
crafted.
Yeah, the special program in Bergamot remains in terms of the 1 acre threshold, but the changing of what is a housing project will apply citywide,
Right,
right? So,
okay. Yeah, thanks.
right, yeah.
Go ahead. Do you think that this change was kind of like to try to convert or allow for Costco's to be built with housing or convert old departments, big old department stores with surface
centers.
shopping
Yeah.
centers?
I mean, I think,
that's really.
you know, to the extent that this applies across California, there's a lot of those,
Right.
vacant shopping centers and the like. So yeah, that was probably a big part of the thinking.
Turn 50% of it into housing.
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there may have been some, I thought I read somewhere about some drama around like Westfield Topanga, and that whole area, they were trying to transform it, including into housing, and I think they ran into some regulatory barriers. So this should make somewhere like a big open site like that much easier to convert.
I have a question for staff. In terms of, I hate to get back to the fires, but have you been asked to do any research in terms of how it might affect future developments in terms of access out? I mean, we're getting rid of the airport. People were stuck on the streets in the
Palisades Drive.
Palisades. I mean, would it affect what streets, systems we develop? Or how we change we've already done a lot of traffic changes to some of the existing streets. Is somebody evaluating how this is going to change those existing changes which were made, which are restricting access to certain streets?
Yeah, I mean, we are kind of just coming out of emergency response mode and just turning into recovery. We've not received that kind of direction yet. It doesn't mean that, Santa Monica is largely a grid system, with the exception of a few places, the topography, is different, right? We're not on a hill or a mountain or what have you, but, I think certainly going forward, in terms of creating new street systems and the like, I think just as a general mobility approach and as a circulation and access approach, generally we try to maintain that grid system because it gives people a lot of different options, just as even absent hazards, just gives you several different options to get from A to B, so you're not funneling everything, to like one lane superhighways, right? You can, turn down 4 different streets and get to where you need to go, so.
I would just, to keep this on our agenda too, AB 2684 requires an update to the safety element to address extreme heat hazards after 2028. And we talked about that a little bit when we did the safety element, but to your point, when we're thinking about, what did Lindsay call them? Like multi-dimensional threats or what, like the polycrisis, that's what it was. Right, right, what's the knock-on effect if we have an extreme heat event like what we had, or an extreme low humidity wind event, which we might want to think about, what is the, what are those impacts? I believe there is a order that Jing referenced, also states that Santa Monica streets are not to be used to access the evacuated areas. So if you want to go to the Palisades, you have to go on San Vicente, and you have to line up on San Vicente to access Allenford and get in with permission. You can't come up 26th Street. You can't come up Lincoln and try to go down at 7th Street, right? That's or East Channel Road. You can't. That's not allowed. So we are controlling that a little bit. And the airport, I would just note, was not particularly used by anybody. It's pretty empty of planes right now. Everybody left. But it was not used as an emergency staging area. And it is theoretically possible, and on the list as we heard, that access back to the airport could actually allow us to open up safe egress south on Centinela, which would provide a little bit more space in an emergency to get out of town, if that were a need.
I was thinking more of firefighting,
Yeah, they
using helicopters and stuff like that.
They didn't use it. They staged out of Van Nuys, from what I understand.
I understand, but it's just a matter of timing. All right.
I will say that access issue is a critical, or egress, I should say, because we have too many cars for the street capacity. And that's why we're trying to push public transit, but it's kind of hard to push public transit in an emergency, or e-bikes. And I don't know if any of you guys saw it, like people getting into Palisades after the fire, we're all over the e-bikes getting up there. But again, it's a real issue. I don't know how we solve that problem. But, and that's why we've tried to solve traffic by public transit. Public transit won't work in this situation.
Commissioners have any other comments? I'll go to item 10. I think it's the next. There's no staff administrative items. No public hearing, no resolutions, no written communications. Any discussion items from the planning commissioners?
Well, if we're getting to adjournments, can we do that? Or do we have discussion stuff? I wanted to suggest that we adjourn with great sympathy for those who lost their lives in the Palisades, Eaton, Hearst, and other fires, and their families, with sympathy for those who have been displaced permanently or temporarily, and with wishes for a safe and inclusive and equitable recovery for all in our region as we make our way forward over the next months, years, and likely decades. But also noting this is a town that recovered from what was basically accidentally called the Northridge earthquake. We have lived through terrible things with a great deal of displacement and loss, and we've built back. And just want to end on that hopeful note that though terrible things have transpired, when we come together and put our minds to it and our hearts to it, we can do hard things together for the greater good.
You're here.
And here's to building back with roof sprinklers.
They don't work. They don't work. Friend of mine was up there fighting the fire. And he saw the roof sprinklers going off on neighbor's property, and with the 90-mile-an-hour winds, it did nothing.
Well, sometimes, I mean,
Now, there's other ways you could apply
I
water.
have other examples where it saved a home, so.
It's 7:13, and meeting is adjourned.